Good morning. The second reading is from John chapter 20, verses 1 to 18. You'll find it on page 1089 of the Church Bibles. So page 1089. It's John chapter 20, the first 18 verses. What follows on from where Jesus has died on the cross and been buried. John chapter 20, verse 1. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, and said, "They've taken the Lord out of the tomb. We don't know where they have put him." So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple, who had reached the tomb first, also went inside. He saw and believed. They still did not understand from Scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to where they were staying. Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They have taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they have put him." At this she turned round and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize it was Jesus. He asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for?" Thinking that he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned towards him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord," and she told them that he had said these things to her. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Thanks, Tony and Ruth. And in case you're wondering what's going with the page numbering there, I'm wondering whether that's Jenny's way of saying, "See, I'm not here at the moment." Our office admin person has gone on long service leave for the first time ever. And I understand things are not as wet as they could be in North Queensland. Look, it's terrific today to be able to look at the eyewitness accounts of the day of resurrection of Jesus. There's a number of them in the Bible, as I mentioned earlier on. Today we're looking at John's account. And we need to remember that John was a great friend of Jesus. He was with Jesus throughout his ministry, and he was there at the cross. He's an eyewitness and a believer, but he's got a special soft spot for doubters and skeptics. So there's great just transparency in his account and in the other accounts about Jesus' followers as well. You see, none of them ever imagined that Jesus would rise from the dead. He kept on telling them ahead of time, but they didn't believe him. Even after Jesus appeared to his disciples, there were others who remained deeply sceptical and suspicious. And so John is writing this broad-ranging to skeptics and to saints and sinners and all the suspicious, and as he lays out the evidence, he says to us, what would it take for you to believe that Jesus rose from the dead? Because something radical happened that day. You know, all the eyewitnesses have got the same human condition that you and I have got, and that is we're biologically disposed to not change our minds easily, to not change our beliefs in the blink of an eye. Social scientists describe this universal human quality as motivated reasoning, and there are different accounts about why we believe what we believe, but it's basically how we deal with the discomfort of cognitive dissonance, right? Where we've got competing ideas, where we've got a body of things that we believe and something in the outside world comes along and says something different to us. That's uncomfortable, right? Normally we accept the things that reinforce what we already believe, and things that we don't like or don't want to accept, we screen them out. Julie Beck, she's a writer for the Atlantic Monthly, a few years ago published an article on the research on this called, this article won't change your mind. It explains something of our tendency to convince ourselves of what we already believe, and we ignore and devalue things that contradict our cherished beliefs. And she tells the story of a guy who left the United States for 5 years. He was with a community in India, learning under a yogi there, and after 5 years he worked out, I've been conned. But he so wanted it to be true, he so wanted the things he was being told to be true, that it took him another 5 years before he left there, 10 years of his life, because he didn't want to let the truth in. And it's a picture, I think, of how we're selective listeners. I'm not talking about, male hearing at night when there are young kids, right? We all know about that one. I'm talking about the thing that we all suffer from. We put likes on Facebook posts. We put likes on the things that tell us what we prefer to believe already. Which means, of course, that we don't actually engage with information neutrally. We don't engage with information as information, but more and more as a marker of our identity. See, we're cognitively tribal. And what Beck says is that we build, it's a lovely picture, we build a pillow fort around ourselves. You know what a pillow fort is? That's what kids do, right? They build a pillow fort. And Beck says we build a pillow fort around ourselves to filter out everything that's too uncomfortable. And sometimes, just sometimes, we might go to the window, look out the window of that pillow fort, and we might see something that might challenge what we've built the pillow fort to protect. But you see, what do you do if when you look out the window you see something that tells you that you built the fort in the wrong place? When the facts challenge your worldview and they challenge your identity. I think coming to church at Easter and hearing about the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus, I think it's an amazing thing for anyone to do. I'm so glad you're here today. It shows at least that you're open to going to the window of yourself and looking out. And, I talk about the evidence for Jesus rising, the eyewitness accounts, because I think the eyewitness accounts themselves tell us that we shouldn't believe anything without good evidence. In fact, if John were here, he would say himself, seeing is believing. So just before we kind of get into what the passage is on about, I just want to raise to your attention how careful John is to use seeing language, which is a little skim there. Might it be helpful if you had it open, and I can't remember what page it was. What was it, 1089? If you can just skim down from verse 1, chapter 20, verse 1, just see how often John uses seeing or saw. See? Verse 1, Mary Magdalene goes to the tomb and saw the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running and says something to Simon and the other apostles. Verse 3, so Peter, they start going for the tomb. Verse 4, both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter. Verse 5, he bent over and looked in. He saw the strips of linen. And then verse 6, Simon Peter came along. He went straight to the tomb. He saw the strips of linen there, as well as the cloth. Verse 8, finally the other disciple who'd reached the tomb first also went inside. He saw and believed. I don't know whether you'd noticed that John wants you to believe on the basis of what people have seen. Did you notice what kind of literature this is? It's an eyewitness account. That's how this passage works, okay? So I reckon what that means is this is a word to skeptics, to people who don't believe anything at the drop of a hat. It puts before us the shock of the empty tomb. And then I think there are 2 resurrection appearances of Jesus. And I just want to look briefly at the empty tomb before we look at the 2 appearances, okay? And the basic question of these first 10 verses, I think, is how do you explain an empty tomb when Jesus was put in there, a couple of days before? Verse 1. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. It's 3 days since Jesus was crucified. It's the 3rd day. John calls it the first day of the week, because he wants to connect this with creation. All the way through John's Gospel, there's been creation motifs. And here is a new creation motif. See, the first paragraph is full of the language of death to remind us that Jesus truly died. And as we were reminded last week, he was flogged, he was crucified, the soldiers testified to the fact that he died, they broke the legs of the 2 prisoners who were crucified either side of him because they were too slow in dying. When they came to Jesus, they didn't break his legs, they didn't need to, but they put a spear in his side to show that he was dead. Out came water and blood to demonstrate his heart had stopped beating, and John was there, and so was Nicodemus, and he and Joseph, wealthy men, take Jesus' body. They prepare it for burial. We're told in chapter 19, actually, they prepare for burial with 30 kilograms of herbs and spices, myrrh and aloes. And what they do is they take linen cloths, bits of cloth, and they'd wrap the cloth around the body, and then they'd smear on a kind of a paste made up of these herbs and things, and they'd layer it, and it would smell sweet, and it would set like concrete, okay? They put the body, this concrete stuff hardened fairly quickly. They put it on the shelf inside the cave, and they left it. Now, why is that important? Well, it's because actually there's the idea that Jesus faked his death still echoing around in our world, right? He felt a bit better after he got taken off the cross and shoved into the cool of the grave and revived. He broke out of the 35-kilogram cocoon concrete and pushed back the massive stone that was in front of the tomb. He overcame the Roman guards. He was well enough to convince his followers that he was fine after all, right? I don't really need to go any further with how preposterous that claim is. But you still got to answer the question of what really happened. Yeah, it's easy to see that didn't happen, but what did happen? We'll just take it in turns. Mary Magdalene's the first to arrive. She was part of the burial. She knows which tomb to go to. And when she gets there, the stone's rolled away. Her grief turns to horror. So she races back to Peter and John and she says, they've taken the Lord out of the tomb. I don't know where the body is. So Peter and John run back. John can't help himself. He tells us that he gets there first because he's faster and younger. And, this is John. He saw the linen cloths lying there, but he didn't go in. Peter blusters in, of course. Verse 6, he sees the cloths lying there. And the face cloth that had been on Jesus' head not lying with the other cloths, the other strips of cloth, but folded up in a place by itself. And, in the original, there's 3 references to linen cloths. Linen cloths. Linen cloths. Why is that? Well, I think it's because John wants to make the point that this is not a grave robbery. You can't just suck a dead body out of the linen cloths and then just leave them behind. This is different to the day when Lazarus was raised from the dead, earlier on in John's Gospel. And you might remember, when he came out of the tomb, he was still wrapped in the cloths, right? The body was covered with them, but this is different. John wants to show us that something different happened with Jesus. Somehow his body has passed through the linen cloths, spices and all, and what that shows us is that his resurrection is to something different than what he was before, right? It's not a spiritual or ghostly thing, it's bodily, but his body's been changed and raised from the dead, never to die again, as the rest of the New Testament speaks. So you see, that means Jesus' resurrection is not just about the immortality of the soul. It's not an ethereal thing, clouds and kind of angel wings and all that kind of stuff. It's not merely life after death. It's an embodied, material, physical resurrection. That is what I look forward to. Every time my knee gives me trouble, I think, only a little while longer and it'll be perfect. So that by the end of verse 10, I think the question is still, where is the body? Right? But John's done a lot of work already showing us what kind of resurrection Jesus is raised to. The question still remains, though, why is the tomb empty? And John, I think, just leaves it there as a bit of a hook for us, a point of interest. And then he comes to the two appearances. And this is where the value is, I think, in the rest of this chapter, because in each of the two appearances, Jesus does two things, not one. He doesn't just speak about an empty tomb. He now gives positive evidence for the resurrection. And then, secondly, Jesus is going to explain something of what it means for us that he's risen. But let's look at these facts. See, there are different kinds of facts. I mean, I discovered a little while ago that the hail damage repair on my car, in fact, left my car subject to water ingress. So now when it rains, I could fill up a cup from the bottom of my car, for the footwell, right? I wouldn't drink it, but it's not really life-changing. I mean, I will probably have to buy a new car, right? But it's not life-changing. But imagine this bit of fact. Imagine you found out as an adult that you'd been adopted as a child. And not just adopted by anyone or from anyone, but adopted, from, you were put up for adoption by Madonna or Kim Jong-un or Vladimir Putin. No, it doesn't really matter, but you can see what I mean. Some facts really do change your life. And what John's showing us here, I think, is more than just dry information. What we're meant to see in these resurrection appearances is that Jesus' resurrection creates a new situation that's marked by new bonds and new connections with God himself. So just come back to the passage again. Jesus' first appearance to Mary Magdalene from verse 11. It's a wonderful story. We know Mary was a woman with a very troubled history. And Jesus had changed her and honoured her and dignified her and forgiven her and restored her, and she was stricken by his death. The beloved teacher has gone. And all she can do in verse 11, now Mary stood outside the tomb weeping. Death has separated her from this Jesus who had given her so much hope. And just like John, she bends down, she stoops down to look inside, and it's not the grave clothes that shock her, but two angels in shining white sitting there where the body had been, wanting to know, what are you crying for? See, they don't get it. They can't understand why anyone would be weeping that Jesus has risen from the dead. And here's the wonderful thing for us. See, Mary is stuck in her own old beliefs, isn't she? Right? She does not expect Jesus to rise. She can't imagine such a thing as a resurrection. And even when she turns around and kind of sees Jesus standing there, she still doesn't recognise him. And even when Jesus speaks to her, she still thinks he's the gardener. Maybe partly because his body's been transformed, but mostly because I think she doesn't change her mind easily. And what are the first words of Jesus? Fresh from the grave. What earth-shattering thing does he say? Why are you crying? Woman, why are you crying? Who are you seeking? And just notice how gentle it is, how kind it is. It's very personal. He wants to draw her out. It's an invitation to Mary to look out the window of her pillow fort and to see him as he really is, the risen Son of God. In a moment of delicious irony, thinking he might be the gardener, she says, do you know where the body is? And Jesus responds in verse 16 with just one word, Mary. She'd heard him say her name many times, and now she hears it from the same voice with that one word, Mary. Her world is turned upside down. Her grief changes to joy. Where there was confusion and sadness, her heart now floods with belief and joy. But Jesus isn't finished yet. See, the transformation that Jesus brings by rising from the dead is more than just believing he's risen from the dead. It's more than just reconnecting with old friends who we've said goodbye to, or restoring pre-death relationships. There's something more going on here that Jesus wants to give. He wants to give her a deeper bond with God himself. So at the end of verse 16, she says, Rabboni, which means teacher, and Jesus says something more. Don't hang on to me, because I haven't yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I'm ascending to my Father and your Father, my God, and your God. See, in each of Jesus' resurrection appearances here, Jesus is going to give to his followers exactly what they need at the time. To Thomas, who doubted Jesus had even risen, he said to Thomas, touch me. Put your hand in my side. It really is me. To Mary, who wants to cling on to Jesus and that human connection that she's had, expressed in that word Rabboni, teacher, Jesus tells her she needs to let go of a human-sized view of him. He's been raised from the dead, he's ascending to the Father, and Jesus' death and his resurrection, his ascension, means there's now going to be a completely new relationship with God. Since Jesus has broken through death, now all the privileges that belong to him become ours. And the central privilege is this: we can call God our Heavenly Father. Jesus is saying the transformation that the resurrection brings means God is now my Father. I don't need to fear him because of my shortcomings. He's your Father because he's mine. That eternal life that I've been talking about through John's Gospel, it's with the Father, it's yours in this new connection. And that's why he calls my disciples my brothers now. Did you notice that? See, that's the mark of the new bond, a new connection through the resurrection, that we call Jesus our brother, right? And we've entered into a new family. We become the children of God. And, you know, a little bit below our section, down verse 19 and following, the evening of the first day of the week when the disciples were together with the doors locked for fear of the Jewish leaders, Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. And again, verse 21, Jesus says, peace be with you. As the Father sent me, I'm sending you. I mean, just think about their situation. The Jewish leaders have just executed their leader, illegally crucified him. The question's got to be, are they going to come for us too? So the room's locked, quite understandable, but the locked door's no issue for the risen Jesus. He can pass through the grave clothes, he can pass through the walls there. I don't know how exactly, but it's a very helpful thing to be able to do, isn't it? I mean, what it means is there is nowhere you can go away from the presence of the risen Christ. You might feel forgotten sometimes, but he's with you. And even as you pass through death, Christ is present. And Jesus comes and stands among them and says, peace be with you. And he shows them his hands and his side. His resurrection body is physical, material. He bears the scars of what's happened to him. And his scars and suffering give him impeccable credentials in caring for us and guiding us. And he comes bringing peace. Back in that article, just to finish with, on motivated reasoning, Julie Beck writes about how difficult it is to change someone's mind, particularly on things that are important. And I quote, she says, believing what's true often means accepting things that you may not completely understand. Sometimes it means disbelieving your own senses. Earth doesn't feel like it's moving after all. You can't see climate change out your window. See, in areas where you lack expertise, you rely on trust, where there's reasonable grounds for supposing that the source knows the matter of which he speaks. And I want to say to us all today, that is what the empty tomb is doing. It's calling to us through the window of our pillow forts. But I'm not sure the empty tomb is enough to compel us to believe. Because none of the early followers of Jesus came to believe in the resurrection of Jesus by the empty tomb. It's just an inconvenience if you want to be an honest skeptic. Well, what's going to open our window and make us climb out the window of our pillow forts are the appearances of the risen Jesus. The physical appearance, his hands and his side, they demonstrate the reality of his resurrection body. But I want to say even more, to believe that pushes you further than just believing facts, because they end up being more relational than informational. See, they're more than just evidence. The resurrection is a call on everyone to change our heart, to change our attitude, to change our lives, and in the most important area possible, in relations with God. And it comes from the Spirit of God, who shows us Jesus is real, and he will share with us all the glory of the Father. And that is very good news. Well, that's all I wanted to say this morning. If you'd like to ask questions or make comments today, through the QR code would be helpful. We're going to sing again now, Yet Not I, but Through Christ in Me. Then Laura's going to lead us in prayer. Hi, I'm Tim Mildenhall. I'm the Senior Minister here at St John's Asquith. We're a group of ordinary people who've come to know the extraordinary love of Jesus. And so what that means is we think everybody matters. I'm not sure what's brought you online today, but I'm glad you're here. Please feel free to get in touch with us. We've got a bunch of services. We'd love to see you in person. Welcome.